Welcome to episode 2 of Faith and Heresy. Now, I'm trying a slightly different format here, and it's taking some getting used to, but we're going to give it a go, and hopefully as the episodes go on, so does the production level, or the quality of the production level. So, my name's Jake, and what I'd like to do is have a little touch back on the last episode. I did an overview of myself, and I did an overview of Christianity somewhat, and the angle of attack that I'm personally trying to go at religion, and try to see if I can find anything useful within ancient history, ancient historical texts, and ancient historical religions, to try to see if I can find a betterment for my life. And just because I'm morbidly obsessed slightly with religion. So, what I'd like to do in today's episode, I'd like to look at is kind of create that foundation, that fundamental block. So, because we have been thrust into a conversation that's been going on for thousands upon thousands of years, and we're clueless. So we need to pick starting points and look at different angles of attack to be able to figure out what happened. Now, to explain this a little bit better, what I'd like to do is reuse a previous example I used in the last episode, which was we're joining a conversation about what's behind a door. This conversation has been going on for thousands upon thousands of years. And as soon as you die, you go through the door and you find out. However, when you've gone through, no one's seemingly come back to tell us what's behind the door. There's people who claim all sorts of different things. So, who do we listen to? Where do we start with this? Where do we go? And with Christianity, I think the most apt place to start is at the beginning. So we're going to be talking about Catholicism. Not because they're the first, they claim to be the first religion. And when I say religion, I mean church. The early church kind of evolved into what is modern day Catholicism. Now, there was a lot of other religions going on at the time. We will get into this. However, I think we need to go further back than this to get the ultimate foundation block for us to build on. We've been in our current forms for around 300,000 years. According to modern day science, I know that there's young earth creationists, and I'm not here to argue with anyone. Modern day science indicates that we are part of a group known as the Homo sapiens. Before that and during that, there was the Neanderthals. And even the Neanderthals had what could be argued ritualistic and symbolic behaviour. Now, let's have a look at one example. There's a site which is in modern day Iraq called the Shanidar cave, and inside that cave we found pits, and within these pits we found dead Neanderthals. There's one in particular which is called the Shanidar 4, and that has traces of pollen from flowers, leading to the idea that flowers were placed in the grave, most likely a ritual or maybe a form of mourning. A site in modern day France is also another famous site where a Neanderthal skeleton was found in a grave-like depression, seemingly buried intentionally. Expanding into more symbolic or symbolistic behaviours, we have things like pigments. The red ochre has been found in Neanderthal sites, which may have been used for body decoration or some other symbolic purpose. We've found modified eagle talons that seem to have been buried with neanderthals, along with cave art in these certain burial areas or burial caves, such as hand stencils, and this predates Homo sapiens in Europe at least. Now, I'm not saying this indicates a religion. I'm saying that this indicates ritualistic behaviours and a sense of mourning, potentially, at least burial rites, in a more fundamental level. This, to me, shows that this type of behaviour of trying to research and look at and have faith seems to be instilled within our DNA because it predates our species as Homo sapiens. So, with that out of the way, I'm not saying that religion is I'm not saying that religion is just a means of control, or that it's instilled within everyone. I don't think everyone is as interested in it as others, and each to their own. I think, though, that at some level, everyone has a certain spark within them, whether this is biological or whether it's hard-coded in our DNA to have this sense of wonder. And what I'd like to do is explore it a bit further. So, let's have a little jump in time. Today, when we talk about churches and we talk about religion, and I'm going to just hyperfixate on Christianity because I want to devour Christianity and explore it as much as I can and look at all the offshoot branches of Christianity. When we run out, we'll pick a new religion and carry on. However, let's stick with Christianity for the time being. The earliest church, or the claimed earliest church, is the Catholics. Now, Catholicism today doesn't look at all like Catholicism in the 4th century. It doesn't look like it in the 1st century. The 1st century Christians didn't even call themselves Catholics. The word Catholic translates from Greek to Catholikos, which means universal. They was meant to be a universal Christian group, and that kind of directly translates to according to and whole, which somehow gets us to universal. It was first used by Ignatius of Antioch around 110 AD, where he said, "Wherever Jesus Christ is, there is the Catholic Church." However, unlike modern day understanding, it wasn't the only church. It was surrounded by churches, which became known as heretical churches. Even branches of other denominations were still within this Catholic Church. There was a group called the Valentinians, and the Valentinians congregated with Catholics. There was kind of like a catch-all for all Christians at the time. So let's get to the founding of the Catholic Church and why they became one of the most, if not the most, dominant church in history. We'll go into other churches, however I feel that a clear understanding of the Catholic Church will help guide us into other churches around this time, mainly due to the fact that they were the biggest critics of other churches, which they called heretical churches. And a lot of information that we have about these other churches are found in the Catholics' writings. These writings must obviously be taken with a pinch of salt due to the fact that they were opposed to them. So, very biased sources. So let's have a look at early Catholics and how they looked and kind of compare it to how Catholics are today. So, the first century, around 30 AD. Now, I will just say, they claim this link all the way back from Jesus to the Pope today. That's their claim. I'm not here to say that it's true or false. I'm just going based off the earliest source that we have for churches, for the Catholic Church, and this is their claim. And unfortunately, there was such a dominant church at the time, a lot of the information has just been eradicated. So we kind of have to use them as a bit of an authority when it comes to the first century. So let's have a bit of a look. The first century, around 30 AD, just after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, which we're definitely going to come back to in future episodes due to its controversial nature, wasn't Catholic yet. However, it was the beginning of what would become the Catholic Church. It first started in Jerusalem and spread to Antioch, Rome, Corinth, and much beyond. Instead of buildings designated as churches, most of the gatherings happened in people's homes. These churches were led by the apostles, especially Peter, James, and John. I'll take a moment here just to explain that it was only a select number of apostles. The others went into all sorts of different directions, such as Matthew, who went to Ethiopia, or Persia, depending on the source and the account that you're going to read, and Thomas, who will be next week's discussion, hopefully. And this is the same Thomas that is considered as doubting Thomas in John's accounts. This is considered the Apostolic Church, which Catholics claim to be the same continuance of their church today. The Apostolic Church worshipped in similar ways to the Catholics, with the breaking of bread, which they call the Eucharist, and prayer, reading of scriptures and teachings. At this time, there was a lot of persecution by both the Jewish authorities and eventually the Romans. And we are still on the first century here. Some noticeable people from this time include Peter, who is considered the first bishop of Rome, or Pope. This is what gives the current Pope his authority, which is an unbroken line between Peter and the current Pope through succession. There's James the Just, who was considered the leader of the church in Jerusalem, and also called Brother of Jesus, which we'll also explore in future episodes. Then the big one, John, most likely the last living apostle who wrote John's Gospels and the 3 letters and even Revelations, which is quite fascinating as this is used by many current day fundamentalist Christians to determine when the end of the world will be. This in itself requires a full exploration episode to explore it. Even then, I'm not even sure if 10 episodes would do it justice. But a lot of the doomsday cults and a lot of the doomsday narrative uses a lot of revelations. But let's not sidetrack into rabbit holes, because with this type of discussion it is so easy, to the point that I'm keeping myself on a short leash, and at some point that leash is going to get longer and we're going to go down some of these gnarly rabbit holes and we're going to just poke our head in and look all over the place. So that covers the early church. Just a brief little sprinkle of what happened. Let's have a look at the 2nd century now. So in the 2nd century, the church evolved slightly and started using the term Catholic, which was introduced by Ignatius of Antioch, who was the bishop of Antioch. He emphasized unity with the bishop, Eucharist, and resisting heretics, which there were so many. Every different church that you went to at the time was different forms of Christianity. There were different denominations. There were some that probably shared similar agreements. However, it was much freer. There wasn't as much control. And by control, I mean there wasn't a single source of what is Holy Scripture. There was tons of different writings. Some are more accurate than others when it came to their sources. However, they also felt that they had revelations happening to individual people within their churches, which could fundamentally just change the absolute look of religion within their church. So we have catch-all terms like Gnostic and heretics. There were some groups, there were some denominations, such as like the Valentinians, which we spoke of before, that was part of this universal church, which was Catholicism. However, let's have a look now. I'm reining myself back in. Let's have a look at the 2nd century. Polycarp is considered the disciple of John the Apostle. Now, from John the Apostle, obviously he was the disciple of Jesus, I guess it's to Polycarp, and he seems to be a very, very important link between the apostles and the later church fathers. Eventually he ended up dying as a martyr at one point. Polycarp had a disciple called Ignatius. This is where we find a lot of the writings about him opposing heresies. He wrote 5 different books on it, of a grounding of what to be a Christian means. He wrote the fundamentals of what the church is. There was no Holy Bible at the time, like we have today. That wouldn't come around for another 300 years until the 4th century. However, he championed the idea of the 4 pillars, which was the 4 Gospels of the Bible, which are the same 4 Gospels today. And that's still a mainstay in modern Bibles. This is where the Trinity kind of got brought into the mainstream. The term was not coined until much later. The principle of the divinity of Christ and the unity of God was kind of a mainstay at that point, 2nd century. A lot of the Trinity, it's tough to say Trinity, but the fact that Jesus wasn't just a human, Jesus was this divine next level above what is considered. And I'm sure for a lot of you, a lot of the listeners who might have had previous religion in their life, the Trinity is a big thing. However, I'm coming at this from someone who was raised as a Jehovah's Witness, and the Jehovah's Witnesses, interestingly enough, don't believe that Jesus and God are the same. They don't believe that Jesus is God. So that's my mindset when I'm coming at this. I'm not saying that that's not true. All I'm saying is that this is where the whole idea of Jesus and God came in 2nd century. And yeah, so let's not follow that little rabbit hole, and let's get back to it. He was a big advocate against the Gnostics, or the Gnosticism, and argued that Jesus was fully God and fully man. So some of the churches that we're going to discuss in other episodes, they believed that Jesus varied. It depends who you spoke to at the time, whether Jesus was human or Jesus was divine. And even the amount of gods, there was Christians who believed that there was multiple gods. However, before we move on, I will address something I feel might be raised about the Trinity. It is true that it is the building blocks of it. However, the term Trinity didn't actually come in until Tertullian, and then it was affirmed in the 4th century, which is around 325 AD, by the Council of Nicaea. So, now we've mentioned the Council of Nicaea, and we've confirmed that the Trinity kind of came in before that. So, let's jump to the 4th century. The first couple hundred years of Christianity was a rough start. We could pick it apart and delve quite deep into each major figurehead of this time. However, it's such depth I could talk about this period for multiple episodes. I just kind of want to keep this as an overview so I can show how the church was different then than it is today, with its oppositions and other heretical churches. I feel this will give us a good grounding point so that we're all caught up, and with that, what being a Christian was like for them then and now. So, what was the transitional point? I suppose we could look at the Council of Nicaea and look at the way that it was championed by Constantine, who was the Roman emperor at the time. Before Constantine came in, though, the infighting within the early churches, the oppression from the Jews, the Romans who outlawed Christians, had made being a Christian a very dangerous hobby at the time. The fighting between the churches, and I mean like genociding each other levels of fighting. Then there's the numerous schisms that came off from church to church. It would have been a different church from the next church that you went over to, believing in just completely different things. They mimicked a lot of pagan religions at the time, and the term pagan kind of means not Christian. So Greeks, the Greek religions, the Greek gods, they were all pagan, worshipping pagan idols. I'm just using it as a casual. I have no problem with pagans, but I think from the narrative that we're kind of following from the Catholics, they wanted this one true church that spearheaded through all the noise, and I feel like I'm going down another rabbit hole here. Let's try to pick up and get back on point. Oppression of the churches and people dying for their faith by being torn apart by wild animals and being crucified was a major part of being a Christian at the time. It was so splintered that by calling oneself Christian wouldn't really mean much due to how vast each denomination was. Then that's when Constantine came in. He was Roman emperor who had a vision, or claimed to have. He then backed the Catholic Church and put an all-out war against heretics who did not follow the Holy Church. As he put it, he gave tax breaks to the Catholics, to an outlawing other denominations, which I guess is kind of hyperbole. Maybe he didn't outlaw it. There was a lot of emperors that came after him that went after them way harder than Constantine did. However, it created a major rise in the popularity of the Catholic Church, which created the anchor, which is not necessarily stopped heresy. However, it drove it underground and made the Catholics the most dominant church. He then he established a council, which is now called the Council of Nicaea. This is where the church leaders debated what is and is not a Christian. Together they formed a resolve. They came together and formed a resolution of the Arian controversy, which established the affirmation of Jesus being of the same substance as God. And I guess we could say that that's kind of affirmation of the Trinity. Then they set out the date for Easter, which is quite interesting enough, quite apt, because this video should be coming out on Good Friday, along with other rules such as the structure of what the church should look like and the leadership within that church. So, what about the Bible? Because they didn't have one set of holy books at the time. They didn't have a Bible, they just had loads of different holy scriptures that they was using. And people think that, and I did at one point think that it was the Council of Nicaea that established that. However, it didn't actually come about for another 70 years at the Council of Carthage in 397 AD. In Carthage, they decided on a canon of scripture, mainly due to the schisms that was happening in the East. So the Western Church, which is what would be considered the Roman Catholics, even though the term wasn't used, they didn't really call themselves Roman Catholic, they ended up forming the 27 books of the New Testament, and that's the same 27 books that's used in modern day Bibles. They also listed the Old Testament books, which is found in Catholic Bibles, not in Protestant Bibles, though I believe. It was the first approval of the New Testament. A final affirmation by the Council of "Let it be announced that nothing be read in the Church under the name of divine Scripture except the canonical writings." And here we can branch out into a magnitude of different denominations, such as the Protestants, the Mormons, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and many, many fundamentalist Christians. I'm sure we're going to touch on some of them at some point. However, as mentioned earlier, in the next episode, we're going to be doing Doubting Thomas. So, there's all of the books that was put within the Bible, and this was the Council of Carthage, and there were books outside of this that some of these denominations that we're going to look at actually used as their holy scripture, and these are called apocryphal texts, and these are texts that was considered holy scripture by early Christians, and due to the council, due to the what is now the Catholics, they ended up saying, no, this is what is the Holy Bible. This is, anything out of this isn't Holy Scripture. So, we're going to look into some of that. Now, like I said before, we have a lot of the narrative coming from the church, and not really anything coming outside of it until 1945. And in 1945, the only way that I can explain this is there was a collection of scrolls called the Nag Hammadi Library, and this library was in Egypt. There was a Egyptian monk at the time who preserved and hid a lot of these holy scriptures or apocryphal texts that ended up getting outlawed at certain periods of time in history, and they kept this library and these holy scriptures protected throughout thousands upon thousands of years, and we have a major collection of apocryphal texts now. So we're going to be looking into some of them texts in the next episode. I'm not too sure how many. We're definitely going to be looking at the Gospel of Thomas, or the Book of Thomas. We're going to be looking at a lot of the quotations of what Jesus said. And some other Gnostic apocryphal texts. And if there's anything you'd like to discuss or you'd like delved into, because like I said, this is such a vast sea of information that finding a specific point to kind of like go into and come out and go all over the place, it's just diving down rabbit holes. And for the podcast, I'd like to have something structured from a beginning all the way up to maybe an end point, so that we can look at other religions. I don't want to just be stuck looking into Christendom. I want to look at a lot of different other books. So, I would like to thank everyone who's made it this far. I thought it'd be a good idea to increase the production level by adding video on this, what started as an idea of a podcast. If you have any suggestions on any form of improvement or things you'd like to discuss, please feel free to reach out. I'm going to read every single comment and I'll respond to each and every one of you. Thank you for watching the Faith and Heresy, and until next time, never stop exploring. Peace.